Welcome, and we'll be with you all shortly. Thank you, Taylor. If you can move the screen a little bit, there you go. Right, everyone. As you settle in, just take a little second to look through the poem. We'll start in a second. So welcome everyone from around the world and all the time zones you are in. Thank you for joining the webinar today, Climate Justice in Uncertain Times. If we do go over capacity, there's going to be a live stream, and I will drop the link in the chat for folks to share the live stream with your friends and family. So the link to the live stream is in the chat. We're also going to be recording, and we apologize we weren't able to provide ASL interpretation today. We are constantly striving to make our events as accessible as possible. Sometimes we don't get it right, so apologies for that. While you're coming in, please just go ahead and drop your name and your location in the chat and let us know how you're feeling today. All those feelings are welcome, so please just whatever's coming to you, just let it out and share it with everyone here on this webinar. And like I said before we get started, as you settle in, just direct your attention to the poem on the screen. It's called A Poem for South African Women by June Jordan, the poet of the people here on Turtle Island, North America, who discuss issues of race, gender, immigration, and who continues to make us think about visions of liberation. So I'll pause here for folks to put the names in the chat and to keep reading the poem. Thank you, Taylor, for all the tech work. If you've already read the poem or you're still reading it, that's okay. Just take a deep breath and just notice where you might be holding tension in your body. You can close your eyes if you need. Breathe into that tension, feel it wherever it is in your body. Exhale with all your belly. And if you're in a room where there's other people, it's okay if they hear you breathe hard. You're letting them know that you're around, you're still here with us. So just take another deep breath together. Right. And now in the words of the great Fela Kuti, let's start what we have come in the room to do. My name is Nico, and I'm the US 350 Partnerships Coordinator. I'm pleased to be hosting today's webinar with some amazing comrades and colleagues from within 350 and beyond. 350.org is an international climate organization committed to ending fossil fuels and advancing just energy solutions. The title of our webinar today is Climate Justice in Uncertain Times, and I want to start by acknowledging many US activists' real fears and worries with the election of authoritarian Donald Trump, who is currently in the process of stacking his cabinet with anti-climate, anti-justice, pro-military loyalists, and who represent an authoritarian like Donald Trump and the forces behind him. And also want to recognize that for many people of the global majority around the world, they have been battling who have been battling for climate justice, have been battling that against right-wing regimes for quite some time. So in certain times have been around for some time. The myth of American exceptionalism is shattered once again, as we see that the capitalists who once only exerted their brutality against the darker peoples of the world are aligning with hardcore white supremacist and global fascist forces, and the daggers will increasingly be pointed at those who have managed to avoid it until now. Earth is everything. We've been born into a place that we call home. It feeds us, it clothes us. We create relationships with each other based on how we interact with the earth, how we exploit the earth. Whether we're workers, oil workers, or climate activists or teachers, yet the earth continues to be under assault in the name of profit. Climate activists around the world are attacked and murdered every day for defending the land and its people. And we are headed into even more troubling times. So let's all take another deep breath. If there's any hope, it's going to be in the faces of our comrades who are joined here today, here and around the world, who just continue to persist despite the great threats. We are joined today by some amazing people who will be able to share with us today their assessments of the moment and their conditions, and how they have been able to continue the work, and what possible opportunities we may have to build movements that can liberate our people and the land. We'll start with our comrades Jeff and Kali in the US, who are very much internationalists, and then we'll go to Landry, Norley, Efe, and Purag. Then we'll all come back at the end together for some final thoughts. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in the chat. You can put it in the chat, but also in the Q&A function. So we'll start with Jeff, so we can bring Jeff on the screen too. Jeff Ordauer is the North America director of 350.org. Prior to joining 350, he was a co-founder of the Green Workers Alliance. He is co-editor with Lindsay Safir of Power Lines from New Press, and he lives in Philadelphia, and he has some of the best dad jokes in the world. So welcome. Excited to have you on, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nico. And it's really both, I think, I saw as folks were putting in the chat, what we're grappling with and how folks are feeling, and just really feels good to be with the larger 350 family today, as we process what's happening and try to think about what our next steps are. As hard as it is, and wish we were all together under different circumstances. I first wanted to start just looking at who's here and some of the names on the screen, like with a great appreciation for all the work and sacrifice that folks made around this election, traveling week after week, knocking on door after door, making phone calls, writing postcards, how well both we showed up as 350 Action, as folks who are part of 350 chapters in the US around this election, and really how tremendously so many people throughout the movement in the US showed up around these elections. As we know, field and all the work that we do in the field is only about 1 or 2% of the vote. So we made a difference. It was an unprecedented in my 30 years of work, people doing the hard work, and it wasn't enough. But that doesn't take away from how brilliant, hardworking, and how much sacrifice people made to try to influence the election results. And I also want to take a minute just to really acknowledge the pain and uncertainty. I saw people posting that they're in tears, and also the disproportionate effects on many of us. Some of us have a lot of privilege, and so these are, while we're worried about the policy impacts of a Trump presidency, many others, this is extremely personal. Families are at risk of being separated. Gender non-conforming folks are not going to be able to get the health care that they need. And there's so much at stake. And I just want us to take and sit in for a minute, really how the most impacted communities in the US and around the world are potentially going to hurt from the impacts of this election. So as we think about how we're going to fight, we want to think about who's centered, why we're fighting, and what the purpose is. I want to start by offering a couple assessments, like what do we think is happening and what's possible, particularly in the climate movement. But I wanted to start with some big picture, which is around what's happening. I think Nico referenced the appointments, the cabinet appointments, which is showing like what he said on the campaign trail is in fact true about what's really going to happen. But also it creates an opportunity for us that if you're appointing someone as a director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, or as an attorney general who really don't believe in the rule of law, or who don't believe in intelligence or conspiracy theorists, you're creating a first kind of crisis in the attempt to create authoritarianism, that it is possible that the republic, that democratic institutions in the US will hold. Assuming that the United States Senate says we want to have a confirmation vote on everyone, it is possible that someone like Matt Gaetz, it is possible that someone like Tulsi Gabbard won't be approved. And that's an interesting and good first test for democracy and for whether our institutions and separations of power can hold through the Trump administration. So I actually think these extreme nominees present a real opportunity, in particular for Senate Republicans, to stand up and offer kind of the first defense for the rule of law. And I think we should be watching this, and I think we should be doing what we can to try to bolster those folks who are both going to demand, right, he doesn't want to have confirmation hearings, and the second, to really think about how some of these extremists are just unpalatable, even to someone who believes in good government, and believes in someone, has a different ideology, but believes somewhat in the rule of law and sort of the foundations of our Constitution. In the climate movement, three things are going to happen right now. So the first is there's going to be a bunch of work. They're going to try to roll back a whole bunch of environmental protections. And there's going to be a bunch of work to stop that in the courts as one of the first waves. And we want to encourage everyone to support many of our organizations that we're in relationship with, that have teams of lawyers standing by, ready to go, ready to use that aspect of the system. The other thing that a lot of groups are talking about, including many climate groups, is to really think about what's possible in blue states. So for folks internationally, what we mean is democratically controlled states, controlled by the Democratic Party or by progressive forces at states and cities, and what they can do. And it's an opportunity for them to try to be more proactive than they might have been before, because they were worried about the federal government. But now they can be a little freer and unfettered to push for things, but also not just what they're doing in the US, but also the international implications, right? We know the COP negotiations are going on right now, and we want to think about what, in fact, is possible, so that California is also playing its role on the international stage too. There's a lot of money and resources in a lot of the states, and so we want to play our role. So for folks who are in those states, to think about that in your campaigning, it is an opportunity. And then to my last point about who is hurting and who is centered, both in the US and around the world, we're a climate justice organization. So we're not just thinking about how we're taking carbon out of the atmosphere, but we're thinking about the human impacts as climate change happens, as people move. And we know that the targets, the threat is real in terms of who's going to get appointed in the attempt to deport 11 million people from the United States, the way people are moving around the world. And why are people moving around the world? Folks are moving around the world, some because conditions are changing. Many parts of the world are unlivable because of climate change. Some of it is because they're fighting their own authoritarian regimes. Those authoritarian regimes exist because of, some of it's the impacts, like if you can't feed your population, then one way to do it is to try to think about something different. The other way to do it is to repress folks. And you're repressing folks often with the support of the United States or other countries in the global north. And you're also doing that because a lot of it is behind the corporate power, right? If you're ExxonMobil, if you're a fossil fuel company, your interest, or a coal company, or any kind of extraction, or a financial company, your job is to extract the maximum amount of wealth, and you want that wealth to move from south to north. You've been doing that for centuries, this history of colonization, and we need to understand that's what's undergirding both migration and what's really happening. And so the impacts are disproportionate, and we need to understand that in terms of our work. And it is especially key for those of us with a climate justice organization, that in fact, it's not right. What the system wants you to do is fight in silos and be like, we're going to fight in court here on this regulation. But really, these issues are interconnected. And we're going to need to talk about defense of immigrants, defense of who is suffering from the impacts all over, who is going back to unlivable situations, and also what's happening in the world right now, and the impacts, what the US, what other countries have done to make this possible. So when we talk about climate migration, we talk about immigrant rights, we talk about those things. This is all interconnected, centuries of history about how we move, and both resources and people need to be able to be protected, and we need to be able to move resources for a conversion and for a different kind of economy. It's not just we want to have, solar panels installed somewhere else, but it is about moving money and resources. So that's why, as you're going to hear us call in the future for folks to get involved in defending climate institutions and fighting back against the Trump rollback of policies. Also, we're going to need to protect the people who are most affected by all of those impacts. So want us to understand that. And then finally, the relationship, as I mentioned, but I just want to be absolutely clear, the relationship of militarism, right? The Army, the US Army, the largest in the world, spends more money on the military than all the other countries combined, is the arm of enforcement for these corporations that are causing this pain and suffering around the world. And so we should understand that migration, militarism, authoritarianism, these are all linked together. And that is our goal, to understand that. So it feels, kind of rough and bleak, but also we know that there's a lot of opportunity. There's both real opportunity and real hope to reconfigure in this moment of crisis. That folks are looking for something substantively different. They want something that is really different than what we've had. That we know, as we're in COP29, that the countries are not coming together and really making real commitments about getting us to where we need to be. We know a lot of both the global system is broken, the US economy is broken. So many things are not working for folks. And I think in this opportunity, we want to think about what's possible, and what might be, and I'll get to this at the end too, but really what's possible in building something new and different. And we saw during the first Trump administration, some beautiful movements like the Sunrise Movement started under that. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to think very differently about how we organize, how we think, and what is possible. And both the risk that it's going to take, what we're going to need to do to put ourselves out there, but the way in which we can build beautiful community by stepping into risk, by naming who some of the culprits are. It's about the system. It's not Donald Trump personifies a system of racial capitalism, of extraction, of finance, that is creating pain in the US, that is creating pain around the world. People are speaking to that. And out of that, we need to create the kind of institutions and movements and organizing and the people power that fights back and pushes back against that. And I think that is the opportunity before us if we're willing to step into that risk. And I'm excited. I'm both scared and nervous and worried and excited and hopeful that collectively we can take those steps forward while we're watching the impacts of everything that's happening and trying to take care of some of the most impacted folks here and around the world. And I will turn it over to my comrade Kali.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And we'll bring Kali up on screen. Let's give some love for Jeff. And hearing some really important words about like how we need to, how we might need to be like focusing as climate activists. But now I'm going to pass it. I have the great pleasure to invite up and introduce my comrade Kali. Kali Akuno is the co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson. It's a network of worker cooperatives and community-led programs that sustain and grow democratic, just, and sustainable economy in Jackson, Mississippi. One of these programs is the Fannie Lou Hamer Community Land Trust that helps community members collectively steward the land and creates opportunities for affordable property ownership. Kali served as the Director of Special Projects and External Funding in the administration of the mayoral administration of the late Chokwe Lumumba of Jackson. He's written a number of books as an extremely amazing internationalist. Just like always a pleasure to have him. And we invited Kali to kind of give us also his assessment of the moment and some things of how he sees what we need to be doing, not just as climate, but beyond. So thank you, Kali. Take it away.
Well, I want to thank, 350 for inviting me to be here. Jeff laid out, I think, wonderfully some of the horror, shall we say, that is coming in the U.S. So I'm just going to try to maybe fill a couple of gaps because I agree literally with everything that was said. One thing to note about the intersection that I'm gonna bring up here between like the domestic situation in the U.S. and the international situation that I think brings home kind of a practice that we definitely now want to have to get into. So I'm reminded that not all, while this COP is going on in Baku, um, Shell, the Shell case was overturned, yesterday. And for us to kind of keep this contrast of how you got a right-wing government in the Netherlands fortifying this case in the context, and I don't think, I don't think it's by coincidence that this was announced to a certain degree, or at least given the fanfare that's been given in the context of the COP taking place. And to link this very clearly with what all of these different right forces, from Erdogan to Milei to, Erdogan to Trump, what they are planning to do to the planet in the relentless pursuit of profit and the type of repressive social orders that they now deem necessarily in order for capital to be realized. And I'm putting that just kind of in a global context because, unfortunately, I think we are going to see more of this on the horizon, more of this wave on the horizon internationally. I don't think this is going to stop at the U.S. borders, nor do I think the so-called Western democracies and the Western exceptionalism as a kind of an extension of American exceptionalism is going to stop. And we have to get prepared for this on an international level. And so that is the key thing about, trying to build a bridge. Now it's, the United States unfortunately has an outweighed presence and impact on the world because of how its economy has been positioned in the capitalist world system. And now, even with kind of its somewhat diminishing role on the economic level, it's still, as we see, being exhibited right now in Palestine and Lebanon in particular, it still has a tremendous capacity for destruction that could be wreaked upon the entire world, which the entire world is not sleeping on. I think we have to be real that there are concrete reasons, despite the global outrage, there has not been as much direct intervention in stopping this genocide from taking place. And that is primarily because of the fear that I think everyone has of the awesome might of the U.S. military. But what that is doing is creating a number of contradictions that we're going to have to try to, I think, navigate all together. And let me start with one and then come back to, I think, the deeper ecological and environmental crisis. And this is maybe more of a projection. So, take it with that in mind. But I think we are witnessing the collapse of the so-called international rules-based order before our very eyes. Similar to what took place with the League of Nations in the early 20th century. And it's not quite clear what could or should replace it. Just because this rule-based order around international law relative to the kind of the implementation and monitoring of human rights collapses does not necessarily mean that the economic world order in and itself will collapse because that dimension of this international system collapse. So the WTO and all these other things could very well continue while the kind of the norms based around mediating conflicts, et cetera, or being able to plan out climate agreements, for instance, that may collapse. But this enforcement role that Jeff was talking about, the U.S. military continuing, that role that it plays could continue. And we need to get prepared for that and understand what are the real concrete terms that are actively being negotiated with guns and bullets and tanks and bombs and what is taking place, particularly in the Ukraine, in the situation with Palestine. Now, I'm saying that because, there's a particular false narrative that has been perpetuated, even by Trump himself, that he and his forces are more allied with peace and are going to end the number of conflicts. That may be true in the case of the Ukraine, that he will just be willing to surrender that struggle and back out unless NATO, does what he says, which is basically, he's going to treat them like a gangster would treat them, is what he's clearly articulated, and charge them excessive rents as a new means of extraction, even amongst the European partners. And be clear, that is what Trump has outlined, that what he would basically do. Now, he may do that, but it is very clear from his appointments that he is appointing war hawks. And that the first step may be an extended war with Iran, which they've been clamoring for, and which their partner Netanyahu and the Israeli right clearly want. But I would argue, folks, that this is just really a prelude towards a larger conflict for hegemony over this present world system with China. And that, these are just steps to get to that particular point. And it is on this point, I think we need to be clear that sadly, they will likely find a level of alignment with the Democratic Party. And that we need to be clear that, and why I'm bringing this up is for both a domestic and international audience. We need to be very clear about, even in this time of duress, where certain forces of capital and their instruments like the Democratic Party, they will be, I think, vehemently opposed with them on certain aspects of the domestic agenda and domestic repression, but they will have a lot of alignment, unfortunately, on the international agenda and how that's carried out. And to the extent that they could extract, and find agreement on concessions around trying to reindustrialize the United States, clearly they will agree. And why I say that, because in truth, a lot of what Biden pushed in terms of this containment policies around China were really adoptions of what the Trump administration had already put in place, right? And that is going to be true relative also, I think, to what we've seen in a de facto way with Palestine, now moving into a just straight de jure way, but meaning enshrined in law, for instance, with these moves that are now being taking place, like in the Israeli Knesset, and straight out the mouths of some of the war cabinet around annexing either all or parts of the West Bank. So I'm just citing these as concrete examples of how some things will move on an international level, but what are why and who are the forces that will align with this in the United States on a domestic level? Because we have to be very clear how we then campaign at an international level to have a impact wherever we may be, but what are the concrete things that all of you who are not in the United States, we are going to now need more than ever for a level of solidarity to block some of the things that will have a domestic impact. And what I cite is just as a brief example, time is not going to permit to go into too much detail, but I'm very heartened by what is going on right now with the blocking of some of the shipments that are taking place, these arms shipments from the U.S. that are taking place in Spain. And some of that being coordinated by the Progressive International. But I think this level of what people are doing and the type of international coordination that this speaks to, that they were blocked in Spain, they were blocked in Morocco, appear to be now going to be blocked in other places from this campaign, speaks to the type of international organizing that we're going to have to do in raising our own domestic, strengths and capacities, but doing a hard level of international coordination is going to be critical to blocking Trump's agenda internationally, but also domestically. It will have some reverberations then. I think my time, I'm a lot more to say. Hopefully that was helpful and build on what Jeff laid out in some concrete ways, and looking forward to working with all of you, to build the world that we need in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kali. Yes, please give some love to Kali. We're going to come back to some of those questions too that both you and Jeff have raised about like the collapse of the rule-based order and this internationalism. But I want to shift actually right into by demand of the people want to hear some of our international comrades. So this is where we're headed to. And Landry Ninteretse is an environmental activist, peace builder, and Pan-Africanist from Burundi. He has a background in communication with a master's degree in international development. He's an active member of several national and regional environmental networks that has been working with 350.org since 2009 and has been working with 350. He has been working with 350 since 2009 to help build and grow the regional climate movement. In 2019, he launched Africa VUCA, a regional platform of over 300 groups working to stop fossil fuel development and promote clean alternative energy solutions. So thank you, Landry.
Thank you so much, Nico, and hi, everybody. Good afternoon, where you're connecting from. Look, one of the good thing that we have in mind when we heard about the news is we're reminded of some of the Trump's first decision during his first term to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and knowing how what's happening in the global space on climate matters affect the entire world collectively. So as a continent that has been historically affected by, can continue to be affected by climate change, that decision has caused and continue causing a horrible impact on the community that have done almost nothing to create the crisis we're in. So that's one. The second reminder was the way, the very horrible insult that Trump had kind of been regularly sharing the news to qualify the continent, a continent where a number of American companies, fossil fuel companies, continue to come and extract, pump out oil and gas and other resources to be taken on those markets. So basically in the context we are in on the continent, and my role has been to help and work with the movement to build solid resistance against fossil fuel industry from southern to eastern and western of Africa. And over years, we built the connection to make sure that people are taking the lead. And this is to build a people-powered movement that can confront all type of authoritarian regimes and corporate colonialism, which is pumping out the resources of the continent. So to be again in the details is that after years of working and challenging the fossil fuel industry, we've seen tremendous victories, at least at the moment as we speak. People's kind of movement and organizing effort have contributed to stop and halt a number of proposed fossil fuels that would have worsened the situation of populations that are seeing their lives and livelihoods very, very much undermined and affected because of the continuation of neocolonialism practices and other bad practices that make their life extremely impossible. So at the moment, again, through the power of organizing, of mobilizing, of connecting, we've created and strengthened the connections within the continent, but also outside. And I'm very grateful to some of you because we've been in contact with some of the campaigns that we work on. So I'll mention maybe one or two. Stop ECOP being one of them. ECOP, this giant pipeline that is pumping oil out of, which is going to be taking the crude oil from Uganda and then through Tanzania, then exported. And we're also working on another campaign at the moment, which is more focused on solution, because we realize that after a lot of effort put in stopping fossil fuel, we have to be looking also the needs and the solution that the people need. That's where we created another campaign, which was launched a couple of months ago, called Repower Africa, where we do want to bring the solution of the hand people and also claim the resources that are needed to make the just transition. So across the continent, as some of you might know, there have been also a trend in, it's not exactly kind of far right, but it's close to that. It's an increased number of authoritarian and military regimes, whether it's in Mali, in Faso, and also some regimes changing constitutions to remove the limit terms and to see some of the autocrats run for decades and decades in power that make it extremely hard for civil society, community, and activists to organize, to protest, and to claim their rights. So that one of the results is really the shrinking space of civil society, where in certain countries it's almost a crime to be protesting. As we speak, we have 15 members of our comrades and very good activists from Uganda who are in detention, who are in jail, and their only crime has been to be protesting and taking a petition to parliament. So that's give you a level of how far this kind of far-right regimes, it's not only in the US, it's clearly happening in a lot of contexts in Africa and elsewhere. And this is something that really should have to create a sense of urgency within the movement, the wider movement, the global movement, to have this solidarity, networks, and connection, and find ways of resisting to it. So some of the tactics that have been applying in the region to resist such kind of challenges has been to build connection again and identify local leadership, invest in them in form of training, in form of campaigning capacity, training in security, because again, the infrastructure and the context can be extremely challenging for a local organizer to be protesting and advancing in their campaign. So, and also providing, of course, legal assistance to those who are at the forefront of this struggle. So that has resulted in seeing emerging leadership in extremely hostile conditions and contexts, people that at the moment can still stand up and resist the challenges and the oppression imposed on them. So as I think a global organization 350, we have acknowledged and built and supported local resistance, again, across a number of countries. We also built solidarity outside the continent as well, because what's happening now on the continent is very similar to some of the struggles happening in Asia, in Latin America, in other contexts. So learning from them, creating spaces of mutual learning, of exchange, sometimes to even facilitate field visits and exchanges that have proved to be incredibly useful and insightful, where we see people who are trained, who have learned, come back and revive the resistance. So we also provide and continue to provide a lot of training resources, training tools, and capacity, and of course, grant for ongoing organizing. I think that's the only way that we can build power, people's power, by investing and continue investing in them, and also while creating those solidarity linkages that are extremely necessary at the moment. And I will end with this kind of picture where we know the kind of Trump position on migration. And as an African, I know extremely how the connection between increased emissions, the extractions of resources, the impact on food security, and of course, forced migrations. A lot of people at the moment leaving Africa, going to Europe, going to America, they didn't choose to do so. They're a victim of situation where they found themselves, they have to leave their space because of a crisis that they haven't contributed to. So I think as we come together today to discuss the need of building solidarity, let's remind ourselves that what's happening in the US, what's happening in Canada, and other contexts affect directly people elsewhere, and also force some of those people to leave their lovely kind of continent and nation to seek for shelter and safe spaces. So when we can come together to build a safe place for everybody, then these people, at least some of them, may not need to move. And also the last point is about also the support to these authoritarian regimes. We know that he's also positioned on some of the authoritarian and military regimes. That support as well is undermining people's choices and people's ability to be coexisting and to exercise their role and their job as civil society. I think that's another kind of point we're going to continue keeping an eye on, because we know this is urgent, and this solidarity can break that cycle if we all connect. So I'll stop there, and thank you again for this, for tuning in and listening. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Landry. Some really important words there around our international solidarity and the perspectives from Africa. I want to turn to Norley. If you can bring Norley up. Norley Grace Mercado is the Asia Regional Director of 350.org. She's also a board of trustee of Friends of the Earth Philippines, 350 Filipinas, Philippine Human Rights Information Center. She has more than 2 decades of experience in issues related to Indigenous people's rights, national resource management, land rights, food sovereignty, human rights, and climate justice. She's been organizing in the Philippines as well as the other regional and global organizations, and has worked and lived in Malaysia, Thailand, and other countries in Asia. So welcome, Norley. Thank you.
Thank you. Magandang umaga, magandang gabi. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm Norley. I'm from the Asia team of 350.org. I'm based in the Philippines, in the northern part of the Philippines. Before I share some of the experiences of activists here in the Philippines, I would like to give 2 very important pieces of information about the Philippines, especially for those who are not very familiar with my country. The Philippines is the most disaster-prone country in Asia. My small archipelagic country faces an average of 20 typhoons every year, and has topped the World Risk Index since 2009. A few days ago, my hometown was devastated by Typhoon Taraji. It left behind significant destruction in my hometown, with almost 2,000 homes damaged, including my mother's, and thousands of families were displaced. Essential services like water and electricity have been disrupted in the whole city and nearby municipalities. As I speak, another typhoon is expected to make a landfall this weekend, to bring the number of typhoons to 5 typhoons in the span of 1 month. Because of these continuing climate disasters, Filipino activists have always pushed the government to act on climate crisis. But the Philippines remains the most dangerous country in Asia for land and environmental defenders. Last year in 2023, according to Global Witness, 17 people were killed, recorded killings and enforced disappearances. At the heart of this repression is the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. This was enacted during the Duterte administration. We call it the terror law. It's a draconian measure that has been widely criticized for its potential to violate human rights, exacerbating the already dire situation for environmental and human rights defenders. Our current president, the son of dictator Marcos, has failed to stop the oppression. And environmental and climate defenders continue to be red-tagged, harassed, and disappeared. Climate justice in the Philippines and in most of the countries is deeply intertwined with the ongoing struggle for human rights, as those who protect the country's natural resources are also the same people who face the risk to their lives and freedoms. Attacks on climate activists and environmental defenders continue. And with the terror law that we have right now, there's very little or no protection at all for activists who are tagged as terrorists. Essentially, any activist doing organizing or mobilizing work can be at risk of being called a terrorist. Last year, the house of one of the Filipino 350 staff was vandalized with a symbol of the terrorist group in the Philippines, which is a clear sign of red tagging. A few years ago, the organization which I previously led was included in the military's list of terrorist organization. This had no basis, but this is a clear strategy of silencing legitimate NGOs. While I was in the same organization, 8 of our indigenous leader partners were killed in a bombing allegedly carried out by the military during a supposedly encounter. However, evidence suggests that the military actions were unprovoked, and the leaders were not engaged in any violent activity. So this is another example of the growing violence against grassroots and indigenous communities, wherein they are targeted for protecting their land, culture, and also their way of life. I'm going to share with you 2 sets of strategies that the movements and civil society organizations have used in the Philippines. So the first set, I will call it as the bibingka strategy. The bibingka is what we call the Filipino traditional rice cake. It's cooked traditionally by placing live charcoal both on top and beneath the dough, allowing it to be baked from both sides. This metaphor represents the idea that campaigns and mobilizations are more likely to succeed when pressures from below is met with actions from above. I'm interpreting this as when internal strategies or local strategies are supported by external solidarity or international solidarity. In terms of country-based strategy, what CSOs and NGOs in the Philippines have done ever since Duterte came into power was to do a lot of security trainings, not only for communities, but also for support groups. We felt that that was very important because we were facing a truly authoritarian president. We also explored legal interventions. For example, a lot of organizations have filed cases in the Supreme Court wanting to junk the terror law. We did a lot of organizing and storytelling, and especially going back to communities. What we realized is that when we are faced with authoritarian regimes, the best way is to go back to grassroots communities and organize there and build our ranks from there. There's also a lot of organizations doing international solidarity. So this is used by Southern environmental justice movements where we leverage international support to influence domestic campaigns. One particular example that we have done is an international solidarity statement to junk the terror law. We have gathered more than 22,000 signatures and hundreds of co-signing organizations across the world in just a week. News outlets picked up the story and amplified our messages. So that's one of the ways on how to visibilize the struggles of communities in countries. The second set of strategies that I'd like to share is about visibilizing hope through solidarity and community building. In 2022, we thought that we finally can have the change that we've always wanted. The presidential election gave us a progressive woman leader. Her name is Leni Robredo, who dared to go against the son of the dictator Marcos. She did not have the money nor the political machinery, but what she had were dedicated volunteers across the country, mostly from the youth who worked tirelessly for the campaign. We called our movement the Pink Movement because the campaign's color embraced the progressive feminist leadership as opposed to the traditional patriarchal politics. Unfortunately, she did not win. The younger Marcos used a well-oiled machinery, spewing lies and fake news, on social media, a strategy from the playbook of authoritarian regimes. We were very heartbroken and frustrated and very sad, but the movement did not lose. From our perspective, we always say they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. The volunteer groups continued to mobilize as they organized themselves into nonprofit organizations, delivering basic services and support to the communities in the fringes. It's always tempting to stay angry and frustrated, and we should feel all of those, but we should redirect the anger to positive energy. We always tell ourselves that we have survived the colonization of Spain, the US, and Japan, and we've survived 2 dictators. And it can happen again with the help of our international friends. We can prevail. Thank you very much for listening to my story.
Wow, thank you so much, Noli. That was so helpful. And thank you for also coming in at the middle of the night and with a typhoon at your doorstep. So please be safe. We're thinking about you. And I think some of those things like talking about the silencing of NGOs too, we're going to be seeing some of those patterns also in this country as well. Next, I want to bring up Efe. Efe Baysal is has been on the scene of the climate and urban movements in Turkey for more than a decade. He has a history and political science background. From 2008 to 2015, he worked as a modern Turkish history lecturer at Koç University. His academic works led him to meet with the urban movements of Istanbul and the wider environmental movement in Turkey. Since then, he has become part of various grassroots organizations and coalitions fighting against the top-down projects threatening the commons. He joined 350 in 2018 to grow the climate movement in Turkey, and since 2021, he is the Turkey team lead. Welcome, Efe. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, Nico, and merhaba, everyone. I feel honored to speak and share my thoughts in front of hundreds of comrades who have been relentlessly fighting for a just, egalitarian future. As someone from Turkey, I acknowledge that there are many differences between political, historical, cultural, and social dynamics of our countries. Yet here we are against a common threat, the global rise of far-right politics and populist authoritarianism. It is everywhere, as we all know it, and it is increasingly becoming a part of our daily lives and part of the ways of making politics. Landry mentioned what happens in US or in other countries affect directly other places. So now that Trump is in power, this will certainly encourage the trend of rising authoritarianism. Well, I will briefly talk about the importance of fighting against the polarization in the society. But before going into the details, let me first of all briefly give you the context of where I'm living in. Jeff, in his speech, mentioned significance of separation of power and the institutions, which should be protected at all costs. Because I'm living in a country where we see separation of powers is no longer the case. Legislative, executive, and judicial powers are more or less under the control of the government. And majority of the media, which can be considered as the fourth power in a democratic system, is also at the government's beck and call. Of course, this does not happen in one night, and even before the current government, there were lots of deficits in Turkey's democracy. But what had happened is that through the last 20 years, the government party succeeded infiltrating the institutions one by one and successfully used divide and rule policy against the society. And they succeeded to achieve this by relying on popular will. So we are not talking about an authoritarian government that comes to power by coup d'etat or by using force, but the government came to power and stays in there and continues to stay in there by relying on the elections. And one thing that resembles Turkey's conditions with USA is about its social fabric and how this social fabric is actually successfully exploited by the populist figures. We unfortunately keep hearing the families are divided due to their political orientations between Republicans and Democrats, and we hear divisions in the society is deepening. That really resembles what we have been experiencing in Turkey. Our experience in this side of the world shows that the polarization in the society is the breeding ground for authoritarian regimes. And with their populist agenda, they are actually the champion of exploiting the emotions and mobilizing the people. So my humble suggestion to all of us fighting against these kind of regimes is to find ways to break the barriers that divide us. Yes, populist authoritarianism is a threat, but the strategy that has been used by these regimes is divide and conquer. So we have to be constantly aware of this, and we have to fight against this. So within this framework, let me very briefly mention 3 points that I believe we need to pay attention to avoid the deepening of the polarization while we carry on our fights. My first suggestion that comes from my experiences is basically don't feed the fire. One major mistake that opposition forces in Turkey had done was to underestimate or even despise, quote unquote, other sides. This despise could target the cultural values of the people that traditionally support the rightist parties, or this could be about the silliest things that the populist leaders talked about. Of course, in our struggles, we need to develop counter-arguments to the policies and claims of the populist leaders, but when we do this in a reactive way, many times we also act, we can also act irrationally and purely emotionally, which eventually bring us into a echo chamber. We get trapped into that echo chamber. What we need to do is try to see what makes people who voted for Trump act and what motivates them to act. I don't mean we should find ways to reach the most radical ones, let's say the fascists. On the contrary, we need to find ways to crush them down, but at the same time, we need to understand how those discourses used by the radical right becomes mainstream and how they influence the majority of the people. Remember, there are no two poles in the society, no two camps, no two clusters. There are dozens of clusters inside the society. So reaching out to different clusters, finding ways to reach them is of utmost importance to overcome the polarization. The second lesson that I learned in a hard way is about our organizations and ourselves. Organizations in time wear off. When the anger that is fueled by the authoritarian governments is everywhere, this will eventually sneak into our organizations. It affects the way we operate, the way we breathe, or the way we understand the world. And I suppose there will be this feeling of this urge for the activists against Trump regime. We need to do this, we need to join this protest, we need to act fast, so on and so forth. I remember in one of the groups that I worked with, we were everywhere. The organization that I worked with was established to protect the forests of Istanbul against the top-down mega projects, but we literally joined every protest. Now, this significantly increased our visibility, but it at the same time exhausted the organization in time, and the organization lost its focus. And in my personal life, it led me to basically burnout. And especially major defeats like this one, we actually need time to contemplate. We need time to stop and adapt ourselves to the new context and strategize under this new context. So if we want to change the system, we also need to question our organizations. This can be a local organization or the party we voted for. Ursula Le Guin says, you cannot make the revolution, you can only be the revolution. So the change, the revolution should begin in ourselves and on our organizations. My last humble suggestion is never ever fall into pure anger, and no matter what happens, light the beacons of hope and keep them alive. This beacon may be our neighborhood community, it may be a tiny organization. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter because we need even the sparkles of hope that will light our way in the darkest times. That hope motivates people and motivates all of us. I also believe this is also related to what kind of narrative we would like to create. Saying no to something is important, but in these times, what gives hope to people is the solutions that we need to craft. In 350 Turkey, we have been working with local grassroots organizations for such a long time. We organize protests, actions, and events against the energy policies of the government. And this branch of our work is really important. But at the same time, what I realize is when we begin to work on climate solutions and start a campaign on community-led energy projects, one thing I realize is we can actually reach beyond our traditional supporters. So providing a new vision that will beneficial not only for one specific group, but to everyone is as important as reacting against something. So we have to be persistent on what we say yes, what kind of unifying vision we have, and how everyone can be a part of the vision is basically important. This is also what gives hope to people. I would like to end my part with a quote from Antonio Gramsci, who fought hard against Italian fascism. In his prisoner notebook, he writes, so I'm going to read it. Every defeat brings intellectual and moral disorganization. It is necessary to create serious and patient people who will not despair in the face of worst fears and will not fall into ecstasy of stupidity. The pessimism of the intellect is the optimism of the will. In other words, see the world as it is, with its imperfections, but still move forward with acceptance, courage, and persistence. If hope remains alive, the will can overcome many difficulties. And at the end of the day, it is up to us how to keep these beacons of hope alive. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Efe. Hope you get to see the love in the chat for you, and I really appreciate you kind of lifting up that there are no permanent enemies, and so that's a very important point for us. Finally, I want to bring up Amanullah Purag. Purag is a 24-year-old climate rights activist from Bangladesh. He's currently working as the South Asian Mobilizations Coordinator of 350.org and is also the founder of a youth-led nonprofit called 4NDCs. Youth for NDCs. As an activist, Purag sees the climate crisis as a human rights crisis, and he mobilizes youth across South Asia to fight for human rights, security, and amid the crisis. Purag focuses on meaningful youth engagement in the climate processes, especially nationally determined contributions. And he believes that meaningful youth engagement can bring positive transformation change to the world that we need. So Purag, thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you, Nico. It's a great honor to be speaking among such veterans of the movement, and to be honest, I'm a bit nervous, so don't mind me if I get confused or lost sometimes. So hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Parag. I'm from Bangladesh, and a bit background about Bangladesh. We just had a government change. We have successfully overthrown our fascist government 3 months back, and now we are in hands of an interim government. So I'll mostly talk about the challenges we faced when we were under control of a fascist government and that too over for 15 years. And you won't believe me when I say it, we haven't had a fair election in the past 15 years. So when it comes to building a movement or continuing a movement in the country, the first challenge we have always faced, before I tell you about the challenge, here is another background. The previous government was super afraid of people speaking up, and it tried everything in its power to control people's voices and to control people's writings. So they had put every power they had in their command just to stop people from speaking. So the first and the foremost challenge we have always faced is we couldn't organize anything. For example, if you wanted to, a year back, if you wanted to organize a very peaceful demonstration or even a very generic demonstration, you would have to take permissions from 5 government defense agencies, literally 5, and you had to take those permissions way in advance, let's say at least a month in advance, just to organize a peaceful demonstration. That's how afraid the previous government was of the people. And another issue is, even though you got the 5 permissions, then you would have to send them the contents of your demonstrations or the contents of the events you are trying to organize. And if they thought that the contents or the words you are gonna say in your demonstrations, they would just cancel your permission, or they would edit the contents by themselves and tell you to say those things, say the edited things. So that's another thing. And another major issue we have faced for the last 15 years is we could not talk about any national issues. Literally, for the last 15 years, Bangladesh has made several mistakes when it came to national climate justice or national climate security. Several mistakes. For example, the government sold mangrove trees, literally. Government sold mangrove trees. Government bought down forest after forest just to build something that puts negative impact on the country's environment. But you could never speak about those because the government wouldn't let you. And the only thing we could do is we could talk about global issues. For example, China's doing that, India's doing that. This is how we are impacted. So yeah, we could not talk about anything national. And another thing is we could not talk about any mistakes, not only in the climate space, but in the overall country's context. We could not talk about any mistakes, or we could not criticize the government in any way. Yeah, another reason these things aren't out in public or aren't out globally is because we have this act called the Digital Security Act that allowed the previous government to monitor literally everything you said, including the media. The media could not say anything on their own. The media also had to take permission before posting or writing anything about the government. So that's how bad the situation was. There was just no space for criticism, and the country had no opposition. Yeah, there were some official opposition parties, but those were also in the government's pocket. Because if you said anything against the government would just put a tag on you and throw you in the jail. And then there was the shrinking civic space. So as many of you may know, when we overthrew this fascist government, there was a huge movement, a huge countrywide movement led by the students. And a sad part is literally no NGO in the country put out any statements. Around 1,500 people died in that movement over a span of 1 month. But no NGO could put out any statement because the government did not allow them. And if you put anything out, the NGOs were afraid that the government would cancel their registrations of working in the country. So that's why the civic space was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. There was just no open civic space in the country. Everyone was just following government orders. Everyone was just following the government rules. Because if you didn't, either you'd be thrown in jail or your working permit would be cancelled. So, and while saying these, 2 examples came in my mind. So back in 2022, we created made this documentary named Matarbari, the Dirty Development. The background is the government, with support from JICA, established a coal-based power plant in one of the most biodiversity-rich places in the country. And that power plant literally killed a river. The Environmental Impact Assessment Report, or the EIA, literally showed a river as a pond, and the Matarbari project completely filled out an entire river just to establish that coal-based power plant. And we made a documentary on that. And trust me when I say it, after making that documentary, we could not sleep for 2 months because we were getting constant calls from the government's defense agencies, the government's detective agencies. Our colleague back then, Shivananda, who's an Indian, he came to visit the country for the documentary. He was interrogated by government's police agency called the RAB, Rapid Action Battalion. And the personnel who interviewed Shivananda literally threatened him of making him disappear in the country. And we also did a movement. This was one of our youth groups who did a movement back in one of our local hubs. And because of that movement, they faced several issues with the local authorities. So these are the challenges we faced on a regular basis. And the way we overcame these is we built a lot of public demand. all the movements, all the organizing we did, we brought in a lot of common people. So it became difficult for the government to track us or track individuals because there were a lot of common people in the movements. Then we worked with a lot of schools because the government could not do anything to the children, and the parents openly supported us because the parents thought we were doing good work. So this is how we normally executed our campaigns and executed the activities we did. We also did a lot of public campaigning in very rural communities where the government cannot reach. And we generated public demand from there. And when it comes to receiving support from international organizations like 350, I think 350 has been one of the biggest supporters of the youth movement in the country, not because I work for 350, but because it's true. And one of the major support we have always received from the 350 Asia regional team and also the global team is that we had a lot of independence in planning what we want to do. We never had to follow the 350 global standards or the regional standards for the movement we wanted to pull off. And then also we received a lot of media support and a lot of resources support from the global team and the regional team. And I think by continuing this support, we can create more solidarity and create more in-depth solidarity with the local groups and the young people of the country. So I'll stop there and over to you, Nico. Thank you.
Thank you, Purag. So amazing. And let's give a round of applause or hearts, whatever, for everyone. And if we could bring everyone back up on screen, we have just a little bit over 10 minutes to kind of do some more follow-up questions. So thank you all again. There's so many interesting lessons that you've all shared and ideas. I kind of wanted to, I know I had some questions for Kali about getting a little bit more also into like what, what climate activists kind of need to be doing also in this moment. But I wanted to kind of open the space first for some of our comrades, just like in terms of just like, right now there's this question, Jeff has kind of put it out there too, about like staying in our lane, climate activists, like whether we stay in our lane or not. And as you've built, you've shared your different stories, like what are the lessons that you have learned about like the need to stay in your lane? Or, we're hearing Norley, I think you were mentioning also just like the red tagging that's happening to 350 activists as well, that's been happening to people all over in the Philippines who are speaking out. What is the need? Like how have you responded in terms of the movement, like staying in your lane, or like you talking about international solidarity also within the country? How has that worked? So that's kind of a question for whoever wants to kind of jump in. Take anyone who wants to jump in, feel free to kind of tackle that question. And also Jeff and Kylie too, if you want to try to jump in that question about what you think we need to be focusing on.
I can quickly respond. What we did in the Philippines was to have a very, very detailed security planning and risk assessment in everything that we do. What we realized was when Duterte's war on drugs was becoming very, very aggressive, anyone can just be tagged as a drug addict. And then came the terror law. So we thought that we cannot just be we have to be very mindful of how we do actions. We also look at possibilities of creatively communicating our messages. If we feel that the situation is very hot and we need to cool down, then we do that. We don't put activists, especially community leaders, in harm's way. So I think that's one of the very important lessons that we had to really face, and we have to be very mindful of.
Thank you, Norley. I want to see if maybe Landry, Purag, or FA want to kind of jump in on that question too. If not, I want to kind of see if like Kali also just like jumping back into the question with the collapse of the rules-based order too. like, you know, as space shrinks internationally, we're seeing, you're talking about Palestine and the collapse of the global base order around there. We're going to see, you know, what's happening in the different countries that our comrades are in right now. Turkey, Philippines, space is shrinking, civic society is shrinking. And you're talking about like how the rules-based order is collapsing for, you know, conflict resolution, and the military is being used to like control, to do the social control and, you know, all types of control. Yeah, how do we move? How do you think we move with this collapse, this international collapse of rules-based order and domestic collapse? And you're still muted.
Jeff spoke to a point earlier, which is we're not going to be able to fight what's coming without confronting risk. Like there really is no way around that. Now, I think the question is, how do we build movements where, you know, I hate to put it in some way that sounds business oriented, but how do we build movements where the risk is distributed rather than concentrated and individuated? You know, and we have some great examples that I think, you know, hopefully hold, that are within living memory. So what recently just happened in Bangladesh, and what recently, you know, a couple of years ago happened in Sri Lanka, right? Which, you know, it's still, you know, the left government that just was elected earlier this year, which there hasn't been enough fanfare about, but you know, it's going to be seriously constrained in what it can do on an international level. But I think it speaks to the power of social movements coming together to not only articulate demands, but to stand in solidarity with each other and build the type of capacity to withstand certain degrees of state repression. Like that's the way I think, you know, all of us are going to have to figure this out. And then there's, you know, there are examples even within certain existing contexts. You know, Turkey is not a place without a tremendous amount of resistance that is taking place and has been taking place. And not everybody may agree with, you know, some of the leftist or Kurdish, you know, means and methods of struggle. But the fact that folks have still, you know, found a way to organize and assert their rights, there's lessons to be learned there. You know, and I, just from my positionality, what I always tell folks is, you know, I wouldn't, as a descendant of, you know, people, you know, enslaved Africans, you know, our folks found ways to organize in some of the most extreme examples, you know, and conditions known to humanity. So it's possible, right? Even under some of the most extreme terms, it is possible, you know, for us to organize and fight back. The question is the discipline, the will, and the camaraderie and solidarity. And that's the thing that, you know, the neoliberal project, which preceded this project, right? And it is my argument is that neoliberalism is the enabler of fascism, and that the one just kind of bleeds into the other. And we're now in a phase where, you know, the phase of neoliberalism of kind of robbing the public coffers is now giving rise to they're only going to be able to extract by way of extreme punishment and discipline. And that's the phase that we're in now. But that breeds its own resistance, you know, particularly as folks who initially think they're going to be somehow protected, you know, by the new order find that its contradictions become more acute. And one of the things that, you know, neither one of us really talked about, but I didn't think it was the forum, but, you know, I think Jeff did speak to around that there's contradictions that are on the horizon. So like on an international level, to the degree that Trump and them are real serious about imposing tariffs, like that's going to show up at the price tag around groceries and rent and everything else inside the U.S. economy. So all those folks who said that they were just voting for Trump on account of they thought he was a stronger to the economy, and you know, not everybody who voted for Trump is a fascist. People need to understand that. And I think, you know, if broke that down a little bit, I hope folks paid attention to that. And so some of those folks are very quickly in a couple of months going, if that really breaks in the way that they plan it to, he's being warned against it very hard. Folks should know that, by folks within the Republican camp. But if he decides to do that, it's going to wind up alienating considerable part of that, at least that segment of the base. And I think it's going to be our job here in the United States. We shouldn't forget about, some of the racism and all the other kind of stuff, but we are going to have to figure out a way to appeal to some of those folks who voted in that particular way. It's like, it was a false promise. And now that he can't deliver, how do we need to unite and fight, and come up with a real alternative that is not promised by, their particular America first, punish, isolationist agenda. Like, that's not going to work in the world that we live in. So it's opportunity. Like Jeff spoke to that. There's still a lot of opportunity in this moment, right? And yes, it's frightening. Yes, the risk is going to be frightening, but it could flip. That's why I'm seriously hope like it could flip, because they are doing this. This is a vote of desperation. And the fact that 15 million people who normally vote didn't turn out to vote, like that's a critical piece. Trump only got 500,000 more people to vote for him who voted for him the last time, right? So it wasn't like it was a significant increase. His base just showed up. And other, millions of folks who didn't believe that there was anything to vote for, nothing fundamentally would change, decided not to. And so there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that we're going to have to navigate and figure out how to move within, because folks do legitimately want something different. And we have to figure out how to deliver it.
Thank you, Kali. I see Jeff coming off, and yeah, thank you so much.
I came up mute because I so wanted to build on that, on what we needed to. And just some thoughts, and I know we're going to get into a survey of how folks can get involved, but just some thoughts specifically about the opportunities. At first, I want to just sort of rename the inflection point we're at, because it was so, what was so interesting to hear from folks around the world is like what the odds were, what the state of play was in terms of the level of authoritarianism or fascism or state repression, and I was trying to take that and be like, what does that look like here? And I do think we're at a different point right now, that the confirmations, the role of the Senate, the role of separation of powers, all of that still exists. And so what I want us to collectively think about is it will continue to exist, right? The die is not cast about what this Trump administration is. It's incumbent upon us to fight that, and fight that early, and fight that. The other thing that folks said is not to do it the way they want you to do it, right? Right now, there's going to be, there'll be what we think of, what folks in other countries think of, civil society. There'll be all these permitted marches and all these things that you can do, and you can make your voice heard and, get a permit and go to the square. But obviously they're prepared for that. They lived through that in the first term. They know that isn't going to change what it is they're doing. And so we'll see these like constraints on civil society. And so this does get to the question of risk for us, is that we're actually going to need to do some things that are disruptive to the system, that are disruptive to the oppositional class, that may not go directly against Trump, but may go against some of the forces that are undergirding him, to what we're calling the contradictions. That if banks are finding a hard time doing business, or oil companies can't get their pipelines to work. Like, there's a lot of ways in which we can do civil disobedience that interferes with the functioning of how things are happening and increases the risk that we're taking. What I want to say before, and I'll just, the other thing is, we don't know exactly what those tactics are or should be, and some of them we're gonna, we talk about, some of them wouldn't. But first, about the who is taking action. So what everyone said is we need to listen. I think FA was very sharp about this. Kali just was. And when we're bringing people in, and I was thinking about this when I was talking at the beginning of the call, I feel like I need, and we all need to change a little bit how we talk to folks, because many of us are in a movement subculture. We use certain terms based on our, how we move in the world, that were our shorthand for what we think about. And really, if we're going to create the broadest possible movement that really speaks to people, we have to think differently about how we talk about things, the words we use. Now, not that we're using more simple words, but more that we're using more inclusive words that don't feel like jargon. And the second thing is how because none of us have the answers about what we're facing, which is also why we wanted to hear from folks who have fought around the world. It's not how we talk to people, it's how we listen to people and the questions that we ask and how we build the community. And a number of folks have talked about this, that we're going to need this level of resilience and trust to fight back, because it's going to look very different in St. Louis than it is in Massachusetts, that it is in Des Moines, that it is in Florida. And so how we collectively build spaces that are our community, that are folks coming together and that are resilient, and then most importantly, that sort of lay down the frame that we're moving into resistance together, resistance and risk, because this is what's at stake, and we have to lay the marker down now. And that's not in the way that we traditionally have thought about things. That is many different ways that may involve a lot of trying to stop things from happening and being clear about all of the forces, not just the person who's the president, but what are the corporations and all of those folks that are undergirding that.
Great. There's so much richness in what both of you said and also what Norley said. I want to give 30 seconds to Purag, Efe, and Lanji and Norley just to kind of wrap up. 30 seconds. We're a little bit over time, but if you want to give just a few words, I would appreciate that. Let's go with you, Purag.
Thank you, Nico. I think this is a very difficult period for every activist globally with the current scenario that is going on and the constant shrinking civic space. But I think what we need to do is we need to stick together. And I personally really strongly believe it's very important to keep our heads high. We'll be hit hard on a regular basis, but we cannot just give up, This is the one fight we have to fight with our lives. Thank you.
Efe, let's hear from you.
Thank you, everyone. In Turkey, especially for the last 10 years, after every general election that ended with the strengthening the authority of the one who shall not be named here, we made the joke about our conditions by saying, well, bad days are finally over, worst days awaits us. It is actually heartbreaking to see the same thing is happening in USA and other countries right now. But at the same time, I am proud to be part of this community, because whenever I feel discouraged, I have actually this practice. I ask myself, what would happen if people like us, if this community does not exist at all? Just think about it. If people who have been resisting for a just future would not exist at all, probably carbon bombs would be everywhere and we would already reach the point of no return. Yes, we may not be in the best position, but if the world persists, it is thanks to all of my great comrades around the world, and it is thanks to all of you watching this webinar. So I just want to thank all of you. The crisis we are experiencing may be the pain of birth of something new. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, in the words of Gramsci. Thank you. Norley and then Lanji.
Thank you. One thing that I'd like to emphasize tonight is that we need to visibilize hope by demonstrating that collective action can actually yield tangible results, and hopefully this can inspire others.
Thank you. Lanji, final word.
Look, the situation we are in call for very creative and unexplored ways of organizing. And I think there is collective wisdom and richness and lessons inside that we can get from all over the world to face the current situation. That's one. The second element is really building connections and reach out to those groups that we haven't thought that they could be part of this movement to even strengthen the movement that is for hope, for democracy, and for real change for the people. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, we have only 1 more minute left, and I know Jeff is going to hop at the half hour. So please do what you have to do, Jeff. Thank you. We've heard a lot of great insights and lessons learned, some agitation, some prescriptions. Don't let it stop you there. Take what our speakers have said and know that there are no permanent enemies. Go out and talk with someone today, tomorrow, whenever, about what feelings came up for you. What are you processing? What lessons are you taking for your organizing? And just keep organizing, right? But before you go and organize the revolution, we want you to stick with us for 1 second because we have a poll that Taylor's going to pull up now. We're trying to see what folks on our call. I know people are dropping, but you know, take some time to quickly answer this question. In what ways are you interested in taking action? You can select as many as you want. Attending local rally, donating money, engaging in global solidarity, starting a local group, participating in civil disobedience, providing jail support. There was a question in the chat about that. Traveling to site-specific fights for climate justice in solidarity with frontline communities. So keep that up for 1 second. I know folks probably have to run, but just a few more announcements after that. As people are filling that out, I'm actually going to ask Taylor to drop in the chat, the link for the International Solidarity Web Working Group. For those of you who believe that, as we do, that internationalism and solidarity between the peoples is what is going to help us get through these uncertain times, as our comrades have said, we invite you to join the Solidarity Working Group. It's a space for 350 climate activists based in the US to come together, meet activists around the world, and build up our international muscle into our local work. So please sign up through the link that Taylor would have dropped in the chat if you are interested. And then we can end the poll. Thank you for your amazing. Thank you so much. And then finally, there's a couple other really amazing webinars we want you to direct your attention to in the next few days. One is a webinar about climate and fascism, which will be tomorrow, Friday, November 15th at 12 p.m. Eastern. So the same time tomorrow. Please see the link in the chat. Another one is called Rethinking Thanksgiving, which will focus on indigenous resistance on Turtle Island to ecocide, genocide, and fascism. And that will be on Sunday, November 17th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. And finally, our 350 global colleagues want to lift up a petition asking world leaders gathered at the COP right now to fund climate finance for the Global South. So please sign that petition if you can. Thank you again to all of our amazing comrades. Sorry that we rushed at the end. Thank you for all of you being here. We're going to leave with a song from Sweet Honey in the Rock, based on June Jordan's poem that we saw at the beginning of the call. We did get dedicated to all of you because history is changed by everyday people coming together. There are no permanent enemies, and we are the ones we've been waiting for. So thank you, Taylor, for playing that song for us. It will be coming because we are the ones we've been waiting for, right, comrades? That's right. Sending hugs to all of FA, everyone.
We are the ones we've been waiting. 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 Waiting.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, friends. That was lovely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Be safe.